The Blob was a 1958 B movie back in the days of like when B movies were a thing. As I said before, that B movies were not really scary movies. They were just more of the action and less more of the suspense. But this movie makes me laugh so much. But I should talk about the positives before I start talking about why I laugh at this movie so much. I think that the idea of a gelatinous monster is a very creative idea. And also, the characters are very likable, especially Steve, played by Steve McQueen. Very nice acting here, and I do love the effects. And it was a very low budget movie. It wasn't like today where movie budgets were high. Back then, you just put up something cheap, very tacky, very low budget, put it in the city, and then boom, you got something called The Blob. And I think it was a very nice movie to like build up the suspense. It built up the suspense pretty well. The creature killing people by just eating them and dissolving them is a very nice feature. But even for me, I mean, it's a big cultural phenomenon. There's something called Blobfest. There's a remake back in the 80s. So now it's time for me to talk about why I laugh at this movie so much. The Blob itself has become like one of those cultural phenomenons, and I'll respect that as much. I think the 80s one could be very scary. I think the 50s one could be very funny. That's what most people's eyes is. You don't have to take this film very seriously, and I didn't really take it that seriously. I thought it was funny, I thought it was campy, and I think it was basically a movie just to have fun. And I think that's what made it so famous. Also, it is the very first monster movie where the monster is not dissolved. It will stay in the end of time before all of us die. So it will stay. The blob was made out of some type of, I think it was silicone, and it's still there. If you go to Blobtown, which is I think in Pennsylvania somewhere, and you go to the Blob Fest, you actually can see the monster itself and the original theater where the blob came out. And it was a, let's just face it, I do enjoy this movie because it's so funny. And I think the reason why the first time I think like I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be one of those funny movies, is the theme song. Does anybody remember the theme song? You put it in the comments below because, oh my god, that theme song when they say beware of the blob. And yet that was the name of the sequel, and it was very inferior to the original, so nobody really cared about it. But when they made the remake, it was pretty much one special. And then they started to think about remaking it again, probably this year, or maybe another year or so. Is it going to be possible? Only time will tell, and do I feel like I want to watch this movie? Yeah, it's up to the audience for me, and it's up to everybody else, because the 80s one used very crude practical effects, which I did love, and the 50s one was way more low budget, and it was way more funnier than it was scary, and it had some very good acting in there as well. I think 50s B movies have become so special because by the time the 60s to the 70s hit, we got way more interesting in the scares than we did about the campiness. So, and the fact that this blob was, I think it was an alien, as people said in the original, but then the other one, it was like some type of test for like the Cold War era or something back from the 60s. But my freaking god, this movie is so funny. I highly recommend it just because it's so funny. It's hilariously funny, and it's so funny. I had to lay in my bed just to stop the laughter. It is that hilarious. It's so funny. I just couldn't stop laughing at it. Oh my god. But again, I do love this movie. I wish I had it on my computer, though, so I could show you most of the clips, but it's not that possible. But I did show you some pictures and what the Blob originally looked like in the 50s. But if you want to really see the original one, I highly recommend you go to Blob Fest, to the Blob Town, and then you'll see the monster itself. It is a very nice spot, and I think it's, again, a movie that you should have a good time about, not take it very seriously like other movies like Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Exorcist, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Freddy Krueger, etc. It's just something to become special. But tomorrow, it's a monster that's both taken seriously but also not taken seriously, and that is the king of all monsters, and that is Godzilla.